Thank you for joining us today and for kicking off our 2023 Employment Seminar Series. I'm Kimberly Wickert from the University of Kentucky Human Development Institute in Retain, Kentucky. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a mid-career white woman with blonde hair and glasses, and I'm wearing an off-white sweater, and I have a virtual blue Retain background. I'm going to start by reviewing a few housekeeping items before we get started today. Brandon Canada is our technical support behind the curtain, so to speak, and the captioning feature is enabled, and we checked, and the chat is also enabled. If you wish to disable the captioning feature, you can do so. We will be monitoring the Q&A and chat throughout the presentation. We very much welcome your interaction and questions and comments, so please join in our discussion today. You'll also be receiving a survey following our presentation, and we appreciate your willingness to take a few minutes and complete that to provide feedback on the presentation today, as well as any future presentations that you would like to see as part of our employment seminar series. The information that we are providing today and accompanying materials is for information purposes only, does not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the University of Kentucky Human Development Institute. However, we make every effort to provide accessible, accurate, and current information, though there are no guarantees to that effect. I'd like to let you know about our Retain Kentucky Employment Seminar Series for February with the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehab. It will be on February 22nd from noon to 12:30. And the Director of Field Services, Holly Hendricks, is going to be available to help us learn how workers access resources and achieve their vocational goals with the support of the Kentucky Office of Voc Rehab. The registration link is in the chat, as well as the date and information I just shared. So please feel free to copy that and to register. And we will also be sending this slide deck out today after the presentation. Today's objectives are to review who is covered under the Family Medical Leave Act, as well as qualifying conditions under FMLA. And we're also going to talk about strategies to stay at work or return to work. So now I am excited to have Lori Newhouse as our subject matter expert. She is an assistant vice president of Sedgwick in clinical operations, and she assists organizations and individuals in their stay at and return to work programs. Lori leads a team of individuals in developing, implementing, and overseeing return to work programs and strategies that promote inclusivity nationally. Her expertise includes innovative and tailored approaches to absence and disability management challenges. Lori holds her master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from Kent State University, and she is a certified rehabilitation counselor and also a certified case manager. So Lori, thank you so much for kicking off our first employment seminar series of the year with us and for joining us and sharing your expertise today.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thrilled to be here.
So let's get right into it and look at absence management versus disability management in this slide. And this is just a graphic, but what I was able to find in my research is that absence management is federal, state, or specific leave laws and may be the approach an organization or employer takes through their policies, procedures, or programs to reduce employee absenteeism and avoid workforce disruption and maximize employee productivity. Based on this definition and the current challenge for employers to recruit and retain workers, absence management is a focus of many employer organizations at this time. Disability management is used by employers to assist employees who are unable to work due to injury or illness. So Lori, is it fair to say that absence management is the umbrella that also covers disability management? And how do the two interface and when?
Yes, that's a very fair assessment, Kimberly. How we typically look at it is absence can occur for all different types of reasons, not necessarily because of a specific injury or illness, either on the job or outside of work. So employers today very much need to think about a global absence management strategy. And then a subset of that is if their actual employee does have the serious health condition or is impacted through a disability or disorder in some fashion, what that does to their ability to remain at work and to stay at work and be productive.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So we're going to talk about Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, and this was signed into law by President Bill Clinton in 1993 and allows workers to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to bond with a newborn, newly adopted or newly placed child, care for a seriously ill child, spouse, or parent, or care for their own serious health condition without fear of losing their jobs. There have also been amendments to the act that have extended the protection to allow workers with family in the military to take time away from work to attend to situations arising from a parent, spouse, son, or daughter's foreign deployment, and up to 26 weeks of leave to care for a service member with a serious injury or illness. So Lori, I'm going to ask, can you put this into perspective for us? How does FMLA fit into absence management and disability management?
Sure. So one of the questions I typically ask an employer when we're having a discussion is, how do they administer these programs and what have they thought about? Typically, a recommendation is family medical leave ideally should run concurrent to either lost time in a workers' comp claim or simultaneous to, if you offer short-term disability under a disability program, it's ideal to run the two leaves concurrent. Failure to do that allows the employee to stack the benefits and potentially be out of the workplace longer, thereby costing more money to the employer.
Okay. That makes sense. And again, thank you for putting that into perspective for us. Let's dive a little bit deeper into FMLA and look at who is covered by FMLA in the next few slides. So this is something that I found on the Department of Labor website, and the link is also in the chat. This graphic I thought gave a good flow, and you can see that as a worker, you must work for an employer who has 50 or more employees within 75 miles of that employee's job site, and the employee has worked for the employer for at least 1,250 hours and have worked for the employer for 12 months. So again, that information you can find on the Department of Labor website, and that link is available in the chat. Another one of our goals today is to define qualifying conditions under FMLA. And you can see the qualifiers here listed, including that serious health condition that makes the employee unable to perform the functions of his or her job. As we move to the next slide, Lori, can you give us some examples of serious health conditions under FMLA that you have seen in your work?
Absolutely. So from the standpoint of what qualifies as a serious health condition, as you might imagine, that's fairly generic and can be difficult to define, but I have seen anything from irritable bowel syndrome, it could be asthma, to something that is obviously much more debilitating and or progressive, like, a diagnosis of cancer or some other, a very involved medical condition. So virtually, it can also be a mental health related condition. It does not have to be physical. And so when you're contemplating your employee's serious health condition, it's very heavily dependent on the information the doctor provides on the request for FMLA, and whether or not the request is for a continuous leave or more so what happens is the potential necessity for an intermittent leave on a per episode basis. And so the nature of the condition and whether it's continuous or intermittent has a lot to do with what type of return to work discussion you can have, and also what strategies you might employ in order to keep the individual at work, and productive.
Okay, so you mentioned mental health diagnosis, and with somebody who has a diagnosis that may have exacerbations, that might be something that you may see an intermittent leave, or they may want to be aware that intermittent leave is available to them to be able to use with FMLA.
Absolutely. It can also be substance use related disorders. The caveat there is if you have an employee with some sort of substance use issue, it cannot be for the active use of the substance, but FMLA can be considered and would be appropriate for the treatment of that type of issue.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for calling that out, because I think that's a really great distinction. So individuals need to be actively seeking treatment in order to be able to utilize the FMLA benefits.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So the next slide talks about FMLA, and some people may ask, is that a paid benefit? And it only requires unpaid leave. However, individual employees can utilize other paid leave if they have it while they are on FMLA. And at Retain, we work with individuals who may have been off on family medical leave, but they're eager to return to work for multiple reasons, but one of which can be they don't have any money coming in because they don't have short-term disability coverage. They, have utilized their other paid leaves, and they or they may be waiting for short-term disability to kick in. So, Lori, we know that employers cannot manage return to work under the Family Medical Leave Act, but are there ways that an individual can navigate family medical leave and options for someone, a worker who wants to stay at work or return to work?
Absolutely. So the big consideration here is if you as the employer know you have individuals taking FMLA, it's disruptive to your operation, it's impacting productivity. By law, you are not allowed to initiate any sort of return to work management that is encompassed within the FMLA regulations. However, if you do have programs where you are already running FMLA concurrent to short-term disability or the workers' compensation claim, those paid related benefits do allow and actually, require return to work management. So that would be the nuance that would allow the employer to engage in those discussions, but keep it specific to that other paid benefit, the disability or disorder that is causing them to have the work comp claim or the short-term disability. The exception to that would be where the employee has requested an accommodation and they do want to come back, but there are issues surrounding the nature of their work or the tasks they perform that are impacting their ability to stay at work consistently. So it can be addressed on a per employee basis by employee request. The other thing that I really recommend to employers, whether you're administering FMLA in-house or you outsource that to a vendor, have some discussions, look for trends in particularly intermittent leaves of your employee for their own serious health condition, and identify if there's any pattern. A good example would be I worked with an employer that was a food manufacturer. They did a beautiful job of safety management, and they did a rotation of tasks. However, one of the rotations was in what they called their spice room, and it had a lot of odors and environmental conditions. And it just so happened that we were able to help identify a trend where individuals with any sort of respiratory issue, asthma, conditions such as that were being exacerbated when they had to do their rotation in the spice room. And so some, operational shifts in the rotation to exclude the spice room were all they needed to be able to mitigate that issue, keep their individuals at work successfully. And so just by nature of the design of their rotation, they were generating more use of intermittent FMLA than they had even realized. So I do encourage you to take a look at your overall program, look for patterns, and look for anything that is related to the workplace that may be a prompt or a trigger for the exacerbation.
That's a really great point. And we've had previous employment seminar series on inclusive job descriptions. And we look at that not just from an individual, including all individuals, and how you post and hire and retain individuals, but we also look at it from an environmental perspective.
Yes.
And encourage employers to include those environmental conditions in their job description so that they can truly be inclusive. And that's a great example. I think I might use that going forward, because I think as employers, we tend to think of extreme heat, extreme cold, maybe dust or fumes, but something that specific is really, really great to look at and can help them avoid a lot of costs that they may not have otherwise. So thank you for that example.
Sure.
So the other thing that I'd like to tap into your expertise about is normally we think about transitional duty work or alternate work options for people who may have work-related injuries. But in your experience, can stay at work or return to work programs like, gradual return to work or transitional duty work be used by employers for individuals who are out on family medical leave as well?
Absolutely. And I would encourage you, if you have that in place, perhaps on your, occupational side of the house for work comp situations, determine internally if there could be some carryover when you have employees who are either taking FMLA by itself. Obviously, if it's for a care of a covered loved one, you're going to have far less ability to keep them at work because it's not being driven by the employee's own health condition. Mm-hmm. Their need to be off is driven by the medical stability or the needs of that loved one. So I set those a little bit to the side. When it is your own employee's serious health condition, by all means, you can share with the employee, if they can identify what about their work is really creating the barrier to them being able to stay. If there's something about the work, as we mentioned, the environment that exacerbates their condition, very often it's one specific task or some particular element of the job itself that can be a contributing factor. And as you look at your functional job descriptions, is that an essential function? Do you have some flexibility with it? And can you make an alteration to the work tasks, the work assignment to accommodate that effectively, thereby mitigating their need to be off and keeping your person fully productive as much as possible?
Yeah, and I would say, the question here, can employers help workers in their stay at or return to work roles while on family medical leave? That's something that we can help support that employee at retain. So while the employer is limited in some of those options, sharing information about retain with your workers and referring them to retain, we can certainly help them look at those stay at work, return to work options, have that discussion with them. And like you said, look at those essential functions that may be the barrier and how we can help them overcome those return to work barriers. So remember, retain as an option. So certification is an optional tool that's provided by the Family Medical Leave Act for employers to use to request information to support certain FMLA qualifying reasons for leave. An employee can provide the required information contained on a certification form in any format, such as the letterhead of the healthcare provider or official documentation issued by the military. This certification form is one that I actually pulled off of the Department of Labor website. But Lori, my question to you, and I think you may have, kind of talked about it just briefly, but can employers create their own forms, and can they use them to educate an employee or healthcare provider about return to work options?
Well, because return to work management is precluded from the FMLA regulatory statute, I wouldn't recommend that there be anything related to return to work expectations or management on a custom form. As you'll, if you're familiar with the statute, as you said, Kimberly, an employer can create their own document. It must have all of the components that are here, but typically one of the most common ways that an employer may customize it is to add the detail at the bottom of where that form should be submitted with it to be returned to the company, by fax, by email, by regular mail. The sooner you can, your internal team or your vendor can get their hands on the request for FMLA, the sooner you have an opportunity to determine what might that mean for operational impact. Is there another paid leave like workers' compensation or short-term disability that also needs to be filed or started so that the return to work engagement can occur appropriately through that concurrent benefit?
So I love the idea about having information as to where that form goes back to, so that it gets to that person or department quickly. As many of us who have worked as case managers and in the healthcare setting are aware, I think the simpler we can make the form for a healthcare provider to fill out, the better. So do you have any thoughts on that, if an employer is using their own form to do so, to get maybe a quicker turnaround time from a healthcare provider?
Ideally, the more consistent you make it to the federal form, because that is the national standard, usually the faster a provider's office can turn it around. We see a lot of providers that they will charge your employee to complete this. But the more custom you make a form, the more potential time it takes, because they're very used to this content. They're very used to this format, and they can turn it around more quickly. So consistency is very much key when dealing with multiple providers, expecting the forms and needing them to be turned around promptly.
Perfect. Thank you. So sometimes we hear from individuals who are on family medical leave that they're applying for short-term disability benefits through their employer. Sometimes we see workers who don't have short-term disability coverage. Lori, can you talk a little bit about how family medical leave and short-term disability may interface?
Absolutely. So some key elements to keep in mind. Take a look at your leave policies if you have not reviewed them recently. Determine your method of administering FMLA. What I mean by that is there's 4 different options that are outlined by the Department of Labor for you. In my opinion, the best and the one that is most conducive to the employer's productivity and operational stability is the rolling 12-month period. The others allow for you to have your 12 weeks of FMLA and then potentially have another 12 weeks very quickly, rather than it being on a rolling calendar year. The other thing to look for in your policies, if you do offer short-term disability, it should be an automatic trigger internally. If FMLA is triggered first and it's for the employee's own serious health condition, that automatically should trigger a short-term disability claim. Conversely, if a short-term disability claim is initiated, you want to make sure that's a trigger for FMLA to be started. Again, running those options concurrently. If you don't offer short-term disability, then make sure your policies speak to any FMLA for the person's own serious health condition would automatically use any available paid time off or, absence benefit that you may offer. The reason for doing that is because as an employer, it's very tough for you to meet your operational expectations, your productivity expectations when a relied upon employee is absent. So therefore, if you don't run those benefits concurrently, what you can face and what many employers really struggle with is that person has now missed X number of weeks under FMLA. They come back to work. The employer never required their usage of their paid time off. Now maybe they have another 2 weeks of vacation that they can now submit for and take. So you just lost X number of weeks of productivity under FMLA. Now you're going to lose another couple weeks under their paid time off. So it's making sure your employees receive the benefit of these programs that are available to them, but do so in a way where you're containing your cost as much as possible, avoiding the need to hire temp workers or substitutes to backfill that absence, and to look at all of your various leaves and benefits and what can be run concurrently. Obviously, FMLA is the federal family medical leave. Depending on how expansive your operations are, you may have employees who are covered, and each state can have its own independent state-specific leaves that also need to be contemplated. So if you do have an operation that is multi-state, be certain to look at what each state offers specifically for a family or medical leave opportunity, how that then there are provisions in each that say whether it can be run concurrent to FMLA or not. So I know it can become a very large and complex web of benefits, but having at least, the opportunity to review what your policies include and what is the current practice is can really be unbelievably beneficial to stemming some of the absence and controlling the cost that absence creates for your business.
Right. And it's really a win-win. I mean, we focus on this slide about how it benefits employers, and right now more than ever, employers are looking to retain those valued workers and keep their productivity standards where they need to be. But it also benefits the worker as well. And we have seen research that tells us that 12 weeks is really critical, because if somebody's out at some of those markers, their chances of returning to work, and I think that 12 weeks is a big marker. There's some data that suggests if they don't come back within that 12-week time frame, it decreases to 50% that they will return to that employer. And then at 6 months, it's even bigger than that. So we really want to not only help the employer, but we want to help that individual worker as well. We also know the benefits of somebody being able to work while they recover too. So thank you for sharing that. I think it definitely is a win-win, not just for the employer organization, sure, but for the employee as well. So I'm gonna I'm going to ask if you have questions. Again, please, go ahead and put those in the chat or the Q&A. And I'm just going to remind you that we can help individuals who may be out on family medical leave due to their own situation, or maybe even a family member who might qualify, but that person is taking family medical leave to care for that person. So our criteria that you see here are criteria that would qualify someone for Retain Kentucky. And these are the ways that we can be contacted. I've also put these in the chat. So I welcome anybody anybody who may benefit from Retain services. We would really send them our way, and we would love to be able to help them. I would like to thank Lori for joining us today and for sharing her expertise. I think we probably could go on for a lot longer and get lots more expertise, but thank you, Lori, for joining us, and for everybody over your lunch time, depending upon where you are. Thanks, Brandon, behind the scenes. We will be sending this slide deck out, and all of our webinars are posted on our Retain Kentucky Media website as well. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.